The dust cloud rose behind the stagecoach like a funeral shroud as it disappeared over the ridge, and Delilah Sinclair stood alone in the middle of the desert road with nothing but a torn carpetbag and the clothes on her back. She had been inside the way station using the privy when the driver cracked his whip and the horses lurched forward, and by the time she stumbled out fastening her skirts, the stage was already 100 yards gone. She had screamed and waved her arms until her throat went raw, but the thunder of hooves and wheels had swallowed her voice whole. Now the September sun beat down on her bare head, her bonnet having fallen somewhere in her desperate sprint after the departing coach, and the silence of the Utah desert pressed against her ears like cotton wool. It was 1878, and she was 22 years old, alone in a landscape that looked like God had forgotten to finish it. Red rock formations jutted from the earth like broken teeth, and scrub brush clung to life in the sandy soil. The way station behind her was nothing more than an abandoned adobe structure with a caved-in roof, clearly not used in months despite what the stage schedule had indicated. Delilah pressed her palms to her flushed cheeks and tried to think rationally through the panic clawing at her chest. She had been traveling from Santa Fe to meet her intended in Salt Lake City, a banker's son she had never met, but whose letters had been kind enough to convince her father that the match was suitable. Now her trunk with all her belongings was racing toward Utah without her, and she stood in the middle of nowhere with maybe $4 in her reticule, and no water. The sound of hoofbeats made her spin around, hope and fear warring in her chest. A single rider approached from the south, leading a pack mule, and as he drew closer she could make out the details. A tall man in his mid-20s with sun-darkened skin, wearing a battered hat and canvas trousers stained with red dust. His horse was a sturdy buckskin that looked like it could walk through hell without complaining. The rider slowed as he approached, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. The abandoned station, the lone woman, the absence of any other soul for miles. He pulled his horse to a stop 10 feet away and pushed his hat back, revealing a face that was handsome in a weathered, practical way, with a strong jaw and eyes the color of creek water. "You are in a predicament," he said, his voice a low drawl that sounded like it came from somewhere deeper south, maybe Texas. Delilah straightened her spine and tried to look less desperate than she felt. "The stage left without me. I was only gone for a moment." "Stage does not wait," he said, not unkindly. "Driver has a schedule to keep and the company does not pay him to dawdle." He looked at the sun, measuring its position with a practiced eye. "Next stage through here will not come until Wednesday." It was Saturday. Delilah felt the blood drain from her face. "Wednesday. But I cannot possibly stay here for 4 days. There is no shelter, no water, no food." The cowboy swung down from his saddle with an easy grace and pulled a canteen from his gear. He walked toward her slowly, the way someone might approach a spooked horse, and held it out. "Drink. You look like you are about to faint." She wanted to refuse on principle, to maintain some dignity, but her throat was parched and her head was starting to pound. She took the canteen with trembling hands and drank deeply, the lukewarm water tasting better than any wine she had ever sipped at her father's table in Santa Fe. "Thank you," she managed, handing it back. "I am Delilah Sinclair." "Warren Yates," he said, studying her with those calm creek-colored eyes. "I am heading to Moab. Town is about 15 miles northwest of here. I can take you there if you want, or I can leave you water and some provisions and you can wait for the Wednesday stage. Your choice." Moab. Delilah knew the name vaguely, a small settlement near the Colorado River. "Is there a hotel?" "There is a boarding house run by Mrs. Chen. She is decent enough, keeps the place clean." Warren resettled his hat on his head. "But I need an answer soon. I want to make it to Muddy Creek before dark to water the animals." Delilah looked at the desolate landscape around them, at the abandoned way station with its collapsed roof and broken windows. The thought of spending 4 days here alone, even with provisions, made her stomach twist. But traveling with a strange man across 15 miles of empty country was hardly proper. As if reading her thoughts, Warren said, "I am not going to hurt you, Miss Sinclair. You can ride the mule if that makes you feel safer. I will stay on my horse and keep a respectful distance." There was something steady in his voice that made her believe him, or perhaps it was simply that she had no other choice. She nodded once, decisively. "I will come with you." Warren helped her secure her torn carpetbag on the mule and then showed her how to mount. The mule was placid and unbothered by its new rider, and soon they were moving northwest across the broken terrain, Warren on his buckskin 20 feet ahead as promised. The landscape changed slowly as they traveled, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills of red stone and deeper gullies carved by centuries of rare rainfall. Warren did not speak much, but every hour or so he would stop to let the animals rest and offer Delilah water. During the second stop, sitting in the small patch of shade cast by a juniper tree, she asked him what he did. "I work cattle mostly," he said, rolling a cigarette with practiced fingers. "Right now I am taking supplies to a ranch outside Moab. The owner's brother is in Denver and I helped him drive a herd there last month. He asked me to bring some things back as a favor." "You are far from Texas," Delilah said, and saw his eyebrows rise in surprise. "Your accent," she explained. "Good ear." He struck a match on his boot heel and lit the cigarette. "I left Amarillo 3 years ago. Got tired of working for my father. He had ideas about who I should be and I had different ones." Delilah understood that better than he knew. "I was traveling to Salt Lake City to marry a man I have never met. My father arranged it." Warren exhaled smoke slowly. "You do not sound enthusiastic about the prospect." "I am a dutiful daughter," she said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. The truth was that every mile the stagecoach had carried her north, she had felt the weight of her future settling on her shoulders like a yoke. Thomas Brentwood was 41 years old, a widower with 3 children who needed a mother and a household that needed managing. His letters had been polite and spelled correctly, but there had been no warmth in them, no humor or personality. Just facts about his bank and his house and his expectations. "Being dutiful is not the same as being happy," Warren said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made her look at him sharply. But his face was turned away, watching the horizon with that same calm alertness he had shown since they met. They rode on as the sun began its descent, painting the red rocks in shades of orange and gold that were so beautiful they made Delilah's chest ache. Warren led them into a wide creek bed where water ran clear over smooth stones, and the animals drank gratefully while he refilled the canteens. "We will stop here for the night," he announced. "Moab is still 7 miles off and the trail gets rough in the dark. I do not want one of the animals breaking a leg." Delilah's first instinct was to protest, to insist they keep going, but she was saddle sore and exhausted, and the thought of spending the night under the stars was less frightening than it should have been. Maybe it was the way Warren moved with such competence, unsaddling the horses and unpacking supplies with economical movements. Or maybe it was simply that she was too tired to be afraid. Warren built a small fire as the light faded and made coffee in a battered tin pot. He had bacon and hard biscuits in his pack, and they ate in companionable silence while the stars began to emerge overhead, more stars than Delilah had ever seen in her life, like someone had spilled a barrel of diamonds across black velvet. "Why did you really leave Texas?" she asked finally, the darkness making her bold. "It cannot have been just about disagreeing with your father." Warren was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he said, "My father wanted me to marry a woman from a neighboring ranch." Her father owned land adjacent to ours, and combining the properties made good business sense. She was beautiful and accomplished and everything a man should want. But you did not want her. "I did not love her," Warren said simply. "And I did not want to spend my life in a marriage that was just a business arrangement. I wanted something real, even if it meant having nothing else." The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Delilah wrapped her arms around her knees and stared into the fire. "That is a luxury not everyone can afford. Maybe." Warren poured himself more coffee. "Or maybe it is the one thing worth fighting for." That night, Delilah lay wrapped in a blanket Warren had given her, staring up at the infinite sky and thinking about choices and duty, and what it meant to be happy. She could hear Warren's steady breathing from the other side of the fire, and the sound was oddly comforting. For the first time in months, she let herself imagine a different future than the one her father had planned, though she could not quite picture what it might look like. They broke camp at dawn and rode through country that grew progressively more dramatic, with towering sandstone cliffs and deep canyons cutting through the earth. Warren pointed out landmarks as they traveled, a formation called the Three Gossips, the distant blue line of the La Salle Mountains, the path of the Colorado River. "You know this land well," Delilah observed, and Warren nodded. "I have been working ranches in this territory for 2 years now." "It gets into your blood after a while. The space, the silence. You can breathe out here." Delilah understood what he meant. Despite the hardship and uncertainty, despite the impropriety of her situation, she felt more alive than she had in years. The air was clean and sharp in her lungs, and every vista that opened before them took her breath away. They reached Moab in the early afternoon, riding down a dusty main street lined with false front buildings. A mercantile, a saloon, a land office, a blacksmith. The boarding house Warren had mentioned was a 2-story frame structure painted a faded yellow, with a sign that read Chen's Lodging in neat black letters. Warren helped Delilah down from the mule and carried her carpet bag to the porch. A Chinese woman in her 50s opened the door before they could knock, her shrewd eyes taking in the scene with practiced efficiency. "Warren Yates," she said with a slight accent. "I heard you went to Denver." "Just got back, Mrs. Chen. I have a favor to ask. This is Miss Delilah Sinclair. She got left behind by the stage yesterday and needs a room until she can arrange passage north." Mrs. Chen looked Delilah up and down, and Delilah felt herself being measured and judged in the space of 3 seconds. Then the older woman nodded. "Come in. I have a room on the 2nd floor. It is clean and the bed does not have bugs." "I have some money," Delilah said quickly, reaching for her reticule. "I can pay for at least a few nights." "We will discuss that later," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "First you need a bath and a proper meal. You look like something the wind blew in." She turned to Warren. "You are going to the Mackenzie place?" "Yes, madam. Tell Robert that his order from the mercantile came in. He needs to pick it up before the end of the month or pay storage fees. I will let him know." Warren touched the brim of his hat to both women, his eyes lingering on Delilah for a moment. "Miss Sinclair, I hope you find your way safely to Salt Lake City." "Thank you," Delilah said, and was surprised by the tightness in her throat. "For everything. I do not know what I would have done if you had not come along." "You would have figured something out," Warren said with a small smile. "You are tougher than you think." Then he was gone, leading his horse and mule back up the street toward the mercantile, and Delilah felt an unexpected sense of loss watching him go. Mrs. Chen showed her to a small but scrupulously clean room with a window overlooking the street. There was a washstand with a chipped basin, a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, and a wooden chair that had been mended several times but was still sturdy. After the desert and the hard ground, it looked like a palace. The bath Mrs. Chen drew for her in a copper tub behind the kitchen was the most luxurious thing Delilah had experienced in days. She scrubbed the dust from her hair and skin, trying not to think about Warren's words by the campfire, or the way his eyes had been kind even when he was being blunt. He was just a cowboy who had done her a good turn, she told herself firmly. Tomorrow she would inquire about the next stage and continue on to Salt Lake City and her waiting bridegroom, and this whole incident would become nothing more than an unusual story to tell at dinner parties. But that night, lying in the narrow bed and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the small town settling around her, she could not stop thinking about the way the starlight had caught in Warren's hair, or the steady confidence in his voice when he talked about choosing his own path. Mrs. Chen provided breakfast the next morning. Eggs and toasted bread and coffee so strong it could strip paint. Delilah asked about the stage schedule and learned that the northbound coach came through Moab every Wednesday and Saturday. Today was Sunday, which meant she had missed yesterday's stage by a single day. The Saturday stage will cost you $4 to Salt Lake City, Mrs. Chen said, refilling Delilah's coffee cup. But if you want to work here for the week, I can give you a reduced rate on the room. My girl just quit to get married, and I need help with the cleaning and the cooking. It was a practical solution, and far better than sitting idle for 6 days depleting her meager funds. Delilah agreed, and spent the morning stripping beds and washing linens while Mrs. Chen supervised with exacting standards. The work was hard but honest, and there was something satisfying about seeing the clean sheets hanging on the line and knowing she had earned her keep. On Tuesday afternoon, Warren Yates rode back into town. Delilah was sweeping the front porch when she saw him coming up the street, and her heart did a peculiar little jump in her chest that she told herself was just surprise. He tied his horse to the rail and climbed the steps, his hat in his hands. "Miss Sinclair," he said, and there was something almost shy in the way he said it. "I wanted to see how you were settling in." "Very well, thank you. Mrs. Chen has been kind enough to give me work." Delilah leaned on the broom handle, trying to ignore the way her pulse had quickened. "Did you deliver your supplies successfully?" "I did. Robert sent me back with a list of things he needs from the mercantile, so I will be in town for a few days." Warren turned his hat in his hands, and Delilah realized with a start that he was nervous. "I was wondering if you might like to take a walk this evening. There is a spot by the river that is worth seeing at sunset." It was improper, of course. She was engaged to another man, even if she had never met him, and Warren was virtually a stranger despite having saved her from the desert. But Delilah heard herself say, "I would like that very much." Warren's smile transformed his whole face, making him look younger and less guarded. "I will come by at 6 if that suits you." Delilah spent an absurd amount of time that afternoon fussing with her appearance, trying to make her limited wardrobe presentable. She had one dress that was not stained with travel dust, a simple blue cotton that her father had considered too plain for a banker's wife, but that she had always secretly loved. She pinned her dark hair up carefully and pinched her cheeks to bring color to them, feeling like a foolish schoolgirl and not caring. Mrs. Chen said nothing when Warren arrived promptly at 6, but her eyes were knowing as she watched them leave together. They walked through the small town to where the Colorado River ran wide and brown, flanked by red cliffs that glowed like fire in the evening light. Warren found them a flat rock to sit on, and they watched the water flow past in companionable silence. "This is beautiful," Delilah said finally. "Everything about this country is beautiful in a harsh sort of way." "It is not forgiving land," Warren agreed. "But that is part of what I love about it. It does not pretend to be something it is not. You know exactly what you are dealing with." Delilah thought about Thomas Brentwood and his proper letters, about the life of managed propriety waiting for her in Salt Lake City. "You think it is wrong to want more than what has been planned for you?" Warren looked at her, really looked at her, and she felt exposed under that steady gaze. "I think it is wrong to live a lie just because it is expected. We only get one life, Miss Sinclair. It seems a waste to spend it being unhappy." "Call me Delilah," she said impulsively. "After traveling across the desert together, I think we can dispense with formalities." "Delilah," Warren said, testing the name. "That is pretty, biblical. My mother chose it. She died when I was 12. Delilah picked up a smooth pebble and tossed it into the water. "My father remarried within a year. His new wife is closer to my age than his, and I think he was eager to have me settled somewhere else so the house could be properly hers. That is a cold reason to marry off a daughter. It is a practical one." Delilah drew her knees up and wrapped her arms around them. "I am not sure I believe in love anyway. My parents' marriage was arranged and they seemed content enough before my mother got sick. Maybe contentment is all anyone should expect." Warren was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My parents loved each other. I saw it every day growing up. The way my father would touch my mother's hand when he passed her in the kitchen. The way she would laugh at his terrible jokes. They had their share of hardship, especially in the lean years, but they faced it together." He skipped a stone across the water, watching it bounce 3 times before sinking. "That is what I want, that partnership, that joy. I would rather have nothing than settle for less." Delilah felt something crack open in her chest, some carefully protected place she had kept walled off for years. "I am supposed to get on the stage Saturday," she said quietly. "Thomas Brentwood is expecting me in Salt Lake City by the end of the month." "I know." Warren did not look at her, his eyes fixed on the river. "And I have no right to ask you not to go. We have known each other for 4 days. I am a drifter with no land and no prospects beyond the next job. You would be a fool to give up a secure future for someone like me." "Yes," Delilah said, "I would be." They sat in silence as the sun sank lower and the shadows lengthened across the river. Finally, Warren stood and offered her his hand to help her up. His palm was calloused and warm, and when she was on her feet, he did not immediately let go. "Delilah," he said, his voice rough, "if things were different, if you were not promised to another man and I had something to offer you, I would ask you to stay." Her breath caught in her throat. "Warren, but I am not going to do that," he continued, finally releasing her hand, "because it would not be fair to you. You deserve security and a good home, not a life of uncertainty following a cowboy from job to job. So I will walk you back to Mrs. Chen's, and I will wish you well, and I will try to forget the way you look right now with the sunset in your hair." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes. "What if I do not want you to forget?" Warren closed his eyes briefly, and she saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. "Then we are both fools," he said softly, and led her back toward town. That night Delilah lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind churning. Everything Warren had said made sense. She barely knew him. A secure marriage to Thomas Brentwood was infinitely more sensible than throwing her future away for a man she had spent a total of perhaps 20 hours with. It was madness to even consider it. But she could not stop thinking about the way Warren had looked at her by the river, with such longing and such honor all tangled together. Could not stop remembering his words about wanting something real even if it meant having nothing else. The next morning, Warren came to the boarding house with his hat in his hands and asked Mrs. Chen if he could hire Delilah's time for the day. He needed help selecting supplies at the mercantile for Robert Mackenzie, he explained, and a woman's eye would be useful for the household goods. Mrs. Chen agreed with an expression that suggested she was not fooled for a moment, but she sent Delilah off with Warren anyway. They spent the morning in the mercantile, ostensibly choosing between different weights of cotton fabric and evaluating the quality of various kitchen implements, but really just stealing every moment they could together. Warren told her about growing up on the Texas ranch, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the first time he had helped drive cattle to market, and realized there was a whole world beyond the boundaries of his father's land. Delilah told him about Santa Fe, about the stifling social expectations of her father's circle, about the books she loved to read that her stepmother considered unsuitable for a young lady. She told him about her mother, who had been Navajo, and how that heritage had made Delilah forever an outsider in the white society her father inhabited, not quite acceptable despite his money and position. "That is why he wants you safely married off and far away," Warren said quietly. "Because you are a reminder of something that does not fit his new life." "Yes," Delilah said, surprised by how much it hurt to hear it spoken aloud. "I think that is exactly it." Warren set down the flour sack he had been examining and turned to face her fully. "You are better than all of them," he said with sudden intensity. "Your father, his wife, that banker in Salt Lake City. You are brave and smart, and you do not flinch from hard truths. Any man would be lucky to have you in his life." The mercantile owner coughed discreetly from behind the counter, reminding them they had an audience. Delilah felt heat flood her cheeks, but Warren did not look away. That afternoon they walked through the red rock country surrounding Moab, Warren pointing out plants that were edible and tracks left by desert animals. He taught her how to read the landscape, to see the subtle signs of water and shelter that meant the difference between life and death in this unforgiving place. And slowly, without either of them quite meaning it to happen, his hand found hers and their fingers laced together as naturally as breathing. "I am falling in love with you," Warren said finally, stopping on a ridge overlooking a vast canyon carved by wind and water. "I know it is too fast and I have no right to it, but there it is. I am in love with you, Delilah Sinclair." Delilah turned to face him, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "I am supposed to get on the stage in 3 days. I know. Thomas Brentwood is expecting me. I know. He will have paid for my passage. My father will be furious if I do not fulfill the arrangement. I know all of that." Warren cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "But I love you anyway, and I will love you whether you get on that stage or not. I just needed you to know before you made your choice." Delilah rose on her toes and kissed him, pouring everything she felt into it. The fear and the longing and the desperate hope that maybe happiness was possible after all. Warren made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer. And for a long moment, there was nothing in the world but the two of them and the vast red country stretching out forever on all sides. When they finally broke apart, Delilah rested her forehead against his chest and said, "I am terrified." "So am I." Warren stroked her hair, his touch soothing. "But I would rather be terrified with you than content without you." They walked back to town as the sun began to set, planning in low voices. Warren said he had enough saved to get them to Denver, where he had contacts in the cattle business who could help him find steady work. It would not be an easy life, at least not at first, but they would be together and they would be free. "When do we leave?" Delilah asked, and Warren looked at her with such joy that it transformed his whole face. Tomorrow night, he said. I need to finish the supply run to Robert's ranch first, but then we can head east. If we travel at night, we can be well away from here before anyone knows you are gone. Delilah nodded, trying to match his calm even though her stomach was churning with equal parts excitement and terror. She was about to throw away everything her father had planned for her, about to run off with a man she had known for less than a week. It was scandalous and reckless and completely insane. It was also the first thing she had done in years that felt entirely right. Mrs. Chen knew something was happening. The older woman said nothing, but her eyes followed Delilah all through Thursday as she helped with the laundry and the cooking, and that evening after supper she called Delilah into the kitchen. "You are leaving," she said flatly, crossing her arms over her chest. "With Warren Yates." There was no point in lying. Delilah met Mrs. Chen's gaze and nodded. "Tomorrow night. You have known him for 1 week." "Yes." Mrs. Chen studied her for a long moment. Then she sighed and reached into her apron pocket, pulling out a small leather pouch. "Here. This is what I would have paid you for the work this week, plus a little extra. You will need it wherever you are going." Delilah felt tears spring to her eyes. "Mrs. Chen, I cannot." "Yes, you can, and you will." The older woman's face softened slightly. "I came to this country with nothing but the clothes on my back and hope in my heart. My husband was not what my family would have chosen for me, but he was what I chose for myself. We had 32 good years together before a fever took him." She pressed the pouch into Delilah's hands. "Choose love, child. Choose it every time." Delilah hugged her impulsively, and after a moment Mrs. Chen hugged her back, patting her shoulder with rough affection. Warren came for her at midnight on Friday, leading 2 horses and his pack mule through the silent streets. Delilah had already packed her carpet bag with the few possessions she owned, and she slipped out of the boarding house like a ghost, her heart in her throat. Warren helped her mount one of the horses, his hand steady and sure. "Last chance to change your mind," he said quietly. "Once we ride out of here, there is no going back." Delilah looked at him in the moonlight, at this good man who had chosen her and whom she had chosen in return. "I do not want to go back," she said firmly. "I want to go forward, with you." They rode out of Moab heading east, following the Colorado River as it wound through towering canyons. The moon was nearly full, and the landscape was painted in shades of silver and black, eerily beautiful and vast. Warren knew the trails well, and he kept them moving at a steady pace, only stopping once to rest the horses and share a canteen of water. "Are you doing all right?" he asked, and Delilah nodded even though her legs were aching and her backside was sore from the unfamiliar saddle. "I am fine." "How far will we go tonight?" "There is a ranch about 30 miles from here run by a man I know. We can stop there and rest during the day, then push on tomorrow night. I want to put as much distance between us and Moab as possible before anyone realizes you are gone." They reached the ranch as dawn was breaking over the eastern plains, the land flattening out as they left the red rock country behind. The rancher, a grizzled man named Pete Garrison, greeted Warren with a firm handshake and barely concealed curiosity as he looked at Delilah. "This is my wife," Warren said, the lie coming smoothly. "We are heading to Denver to start fresh." Pete accepted this without question and showed them to a small cabin that he said they could use for the day. "There is a well out back and my wife will send over some breakfast shortly. You look like you could use the rest." After he left, Delilah turned to Warren with raised eyebrows. "Your wife," Warren had the grace to look sheepish. "It was easier than explaining the truth. But if you are willing, we can make it true. There is a preacher in the next town who asks few questions and accepts cash payment. Are you proposing to me, Warren Yates?" "I suppose I am." Warren took both her hands in his, suddenly serious. I know we are doing this all backwards. I should court you properly, ask your father's permission, give you a ring. But I love you, Delilah, and I want to spend my life with you. So yes, I am asking, will you marry me? Delilah felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I will marry you. They were wed 3 days later in a small town called Cisco, in a clapboard church that smelled of dust and old wood. The preacher was a Methodist minister with kind eyes who seemed genuinely pleased to be marrying them, even if he suspected there was more to their story than they were telling. Warren had bought Delilah a simple gold band at the general store, and when he slipped it onto her finger, she felt the last of her doubts fall away. They traveled on toward Denver, stopping at ranches and settlements along the way where Warren could pick up odd jobs to supplement their funds. Sometimes they slept under the stars, and sometimes kind strangers offered them barns or spare rooms. It was hard and uncertain, exactly as Warren had warned, but Delilah had never been happier. She learned to cook over a campfire, to tend to the horses, to read the weather in the way clouds formed over distant mountains. Warren taught her to shoot, placing a tin can on a fence post and standing behind her to guide her aim, his arms around her and his voice patient in her ear. At night, they would lie wrapped in blankets and talk for hours, sharing histories and dreams and silly observations that made each other laugh. "You regret it?" Warren asked one night as they camped in the foothills of the Rockies, Denver now only 2 days away. "Giving up the life you could have had?" Delilah propped herself up on one elbow and looked down at his face, shadowed and beautiful in the firelight. "Not for a single moment. Do you regret taking on a wife with no dowry and no skills?" "You have plenty of skills," Warren said, pulling her down for a kiss. "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me." They reached Denver in late October, the air sharp with the promise of winter. Warren had written ahead to his contact, a cattle buyer named Jack Morrison, and Jack helped them find a small house to rent on the outskirts of the city. It was nothing fancy, just 3 rooms and a pot-bellied stove, but it was theirs and that made it perfect. Warren found work with a stockyard, managing cattle shipments from ranches throughout Colorado and Wyoming. The pay was steady and the work suited him, using both his knowledge of livestock and his knack for dealing with difficult personalities. Delilah took in sewing and laundry from some of the wealthier households in town, and slowly they began to build a life together. That first winter was hard. The house was drafty and money was tight, and there were days when Delilah wondered if they had been foolish to think love was enough. But then Warren would come home from the stockyards and kiss her like she was the most precious thing in the world, and she would remember why they had chosen this path. By spring, they had saved enough to buy a few pieces of real furniture, a proper bed frame, a kitchen table, 2 chairs. Warren came home one evening with a rocking chair he had found at an estate sale, and Delilah cried when she saw it, because it meant he was thinking about the future, about children who would need rocking to sleep. They made love that night with the windows open to the spring air, taking their time and learning each other's bodies with reverent attention. Afterward, lying tangled together in their marriage bed, Warren traced patterns on her bare shoulder and said, "I want to give you everything. A real house, security, the life you should have had." "I have everything I need," Delilah said, kissing his chest. "I have you." In June, Delilah realized she was pregnant. The nausea had been plaguing her for weeks, and when she finally consulted the doctor's wife who lived down the street, the older woman smiled knowingly and confirmed what Delilah had already begun to suspect. Warren was ecstatic when she told him, swinging her around in a circle despite her laughing protests to be careful. That night he lay with his head on her still flat belly and talked to the baby, telling stories about the places they would go and the things they would see. "Are you hoping for a boy or a girl?" Delilah asked, running her fingers through his hair. "I do not care as long as you both come through healthy," Warren said seriously. "Although a boy would be nice to teach how to ride. But then again, a girl with your spirit would be something special too." He looked up at her with a grin. "I suppose I will be happy either way." The pregnancy was not easy. Delilah was sick for months, barely able to keep food down, and by the time the nausea finally passed, she was exhausted and thin. Warren fussed over her constantly, bringing her special foods he thought she might be able to stomach, rubbing her aching feet, reading to her on the days when she was too tired to do anything but rest. "You do not have to take care of me like I am made of glass," she protested one evening as he tucked a blanket around her. "I know," Warren said, kissing her forehead. "But I want to. You are growing our child. The least I can do is make sure you are comfortable." Their son was born on a freezing day in late January of 1880, arriving after 18 hours of labor that left Delilah weak and trembling. But when the doctor placed the squalling infant in her arms, she felt a surge of love so powerful it was almost frightening. "He is perfect," Warren breathed, staring at his son with naked wonder. "Delilah, he is perfect." They named him William after Warren's father, and from the moment he drew breath he owned both their hearts completely. Warren was a devoted father, coming home from the stockyards each evening eager to hold his son and marvel at every tiny change. He would walk the floor with William at night when the baby was fussy, singing old cowboy songs in his rough voice until the infant settled into sleep. Delilah recovered slowly from the birth, and there were days when the sheer exhaustion of caring for a newborn made her weep with frustration. But Warren never complained, just took the baby and sent her to rest, and somehow they muddled through together. As William grew from infant to toddler, their lives settled into a comfortable rhythm. Warren was promoted to supervisor at the stockyards, which came with better pay and more regular hours. They were able to move into a larger house with a proper yard where William could play, and Delilah started a small vegetable garden that flourished in the Colorado sunshine. On their second wedding anniversary, Warren surprised her with a horse of her own, a gentle mare named Daisy. "So you can ride with me on Sundays," he explained. "I want to show you the mountains properly." They started taking family outings into the foothills, packing picnic lunches and riding out to find new vistas. William would sit in front of Warren on the saddle, squealing with delight at the movement of the horse, and Delilah would ride alongside them feeling so full of happiness she thought she might burst. "This is what I dreamed of," Warren said one afternoon as they rested by a stream, William toddling around collecting interesting rocks. "This exact thing. A family of my own building a life on our own terms. We have been lucky," Delilah said, leaning against his shoulder. "So very lucky." When William was 3, Delilah became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and their daughter was born on a warm day in May of 1883, arriving so quickly the doctor barely made it in time. "She was in a hurry to meet us," Warren said, cradling the tiny girl with practiced ease. "What should we call her?" They named her Rose because she was born in spring, and because Delilah's mother had loved roses despite the difficulty of growing them in the New Mexico desert. Rose had her father's creek water eyes and her mother's dark hair, and she was fierce from the start, announcing her displeasure at anything that did not suit her with lung power that was truly impressive. William was initially skeptical of the small intruder who took up so much of his parents' attention, but Warren made sure to spend special time with his son, teaching him to care for the horses and helping him build things in the small workshop Warren had set up in the shed. Gradually, William warmed to his sister, especially once she was old enough to laugh at his antics. The years passed in the way years do, marked by birthdays and holidays, and the small accumulations of family life. Warren continued to advance at the stockyards, eventually becoming a partner in the business. They bought a house of their own, a sturdy frame structure with 4 bedrooms and a wraparound porch, in a respectable neighborhood on the west side of Denver. Delilah joined a ladies' sewing circle and made friends among the other mothers, though she was always conscious of being slightly outside the social circles of the wealthier wives. Her mixed heritage was less of an issue in Denver than it had been in Santa Fe, but it still marked her as different. She did not care. She had Warren and the children and a life she had built with her own choices, and that was worth more than any amount of social acceptance. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Warren took her back to Moab. They left the children with Warren's friend Jack Morrison and his wife, and rode south through familiar country, retracing the path they had taken as near strangers fleeing into an uncertain future. "I wanted to show you something," Warren said as they stood by the Colorado River at sunset, the same spot where he had first told her he loved her. "I bought some land about 5 miles from here. There is water on it and good grazing. I thought maybe when we are older, when the children are grown, we could build a house here. Come back to where it all started." Delilah looked at the vast red country spreading out in all directions, at the river running endlessly toward distant canyons, and felt tears prick her eyes. "It is perfect," she said. "Everything is perfect." Warren pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and she tasted salt from her tears and dust from the desert and the particular flavor that was just him, familiar and beloved after a decade of marriage. "I love you," he said against her lips. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you standing in that desert looking so fierce and frightened. I will love you until the day I die." "I love you too," Delilah said. "Thank you for finding me. Thank you for giving me the chance to choose my own life." They spent 3 days in Moab, staying at Mrs. Chen's boarding house where the older woman welcomed them with genuine warmth and exclaimed over how well they looked. They visited the land Warren had bought, riding out in the early morning to explore the property. There was a spring-fed stream running through a box canyon, and cottonwood trees that would provide shade for a house. Warren talked about his plans, sketching ideas in the dirt with a stick, and Delilah could see the future taking shape before her eyes. When they returned to Denver, they fell back into the rhythm of their life with renewed appreciation. William was now 11, already tall and showing signs of having his father's build. He was fascinated by the cattle business, and would spend hours asking Warren questions about breeding and markets and range management. Rose was 8 and completely fearless, climbing trees higher than her mother was comfortable with, and pestering her father to teach her to rope like the cowboys at the stockyards. "She reminds me of you," Warren said one evening, watching Rose practice with a small lasso in the backyard. "That same determination, that refusal to be told what she can and cannot do." "God help us both then," Delilah said, but she was smiling. The years continued their steady march. William turned 13, then 15, growing from boy to young man with startling speed. He started working part-time at the stockyards, and Warren watched with pride as his son took to the business naturally. Rose developed a passion for horses, spending every spare moment at the stables and begging her parents for riding lessons until Warren finally relented and taught her himself. When William was 18, he announced that he wanted to go to Colorado Agricultural College to study ranch management. Warren was so proud he could barely speak, and he and Delilah saved every penny to help pay for their son's education. It meant sacrifices, but they made them gladly, both understanding that education would give William opportunities neither of them had enjoyed. Rose, meanwhile, shocked the family by announcing at 16 that she wanted to become a veterinarian. Women veterinarians were almost unheard of, and her teachers at school tried to steer her toward nursing instead. But Rose was immovable in her determination. Warren and Delilah supported her decision, having learned long ago that their daughter would find a way to do what she wanted regardless of obstacles. In 1898, on the 20th anniversary of the day Warren had found Delilah in the desert, they finally built the house in Moab. William was finishing his degree, and Rose was still in school, so it was just the two of them, working alongside hired builders to create the home they had dreamed of. It was a low, adobe structure in the Spanish style Delilah remembered from her childhood, with deep windows to catch the breeze and a wide veranda overlooking the canyon. They moved in on a warm day in October, Warren carrying Delilah over the threshold as though they were newlyweds. The house was sparsely furnished at first, just the basics they needed, but it did not matter. They had come full circle, back to the place where their story had begun. Warren retired from the stockyards the following year, selling his partnership stake for a sum that ensured they would be comfortable for the rest of their lives. They settled into a quiet rhythm in Moab, tending a small herd of cattle on their land and spending their days in each other's company. William had taken a position managing a large ranch in Wyoming, and Rose had defied all expectations by being accepted to veterinary school in Fort Collins. "We did all right," Warren said one evening as they sat on the veranda watching the sunset paint the rocks in shades of gold and crimson. "Our children are happy and following their own paths. We have this beautiful place. We have each other." "We did better than all right," Delilah said, taking his hand. "We created exactly the life we wanted. In the early years of the new century, grandchildren began to arrive." William married a rancher's daughter named Sarah, and they had 3 children in quick succession. Rose completed her degree and opened a veterinary practice in Colorado Springs, where she met and married a fellow veterinarian. Their first child, a daughter they named Delilah after her grandmother, arrived in 1905. Warren and Delilah traveled back and forth between Moab and Colorado, unwilling to miss watching their grandchildren grow. They told the children stories about the old days, about stagecoaches and desert crossings, and building a life from nothing but love and determination. The grandchildren listened with wide eyes, barely able to imagine a world before automobiles and electricity, when their grandparents had been young and brave and willing to risk everything for each other. In 1908, Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 87. Warren and Delilah attended her funeral in Moab, standing with the dozens of other people whose lives she had touched. Afterward, Delilah laid flowers on the grave and whispered thanks to the woman who had helped her choose love all those years ago. The years grew gentler, but no less sweet. Warren's hair turned silver, and his face gained new lines, but his eyes were still the same creek water color, and his hands were still steady when they reached for Delilah. Her own dark hair went gray at the temples, and her body bore the marks of age and childbearing, but Warren looked at her like she was still the frightened woman he had found in the desert. "You are still the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he told her on their 40th wedding anniversary, and she believed him because it was true in all the ways that mattered. They were sitting on their veranda in Moab one evening in the summer of 1918 when Warren turned to Delilah and said, "I want you to know that I have never regretted a single moment, not one decision, not one hardship, not one day of our life together. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes as they so often did these days. "And you are mine. You saved me, Warren, not just from the desert, but from a life that would have slowly killed my spirit. You gave me everything." Warren reached for her hand, his grip still strong despite the arthritis that plagued his fingers. "We saved each other," he said simply. "That is how love works." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink behind the distant cliffs, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and rose. The same view they had watched for 40 years, and it never got old. The desert wind whispered through the canyon, carrying with it the scent of sage and distant rain, and Delilah thought about all the years that had brought them to this moment. William's oldest son was studying to be a lawyer now, while Rose's daughter Delilah was showing signs of following her mother into veterinary medicine. The family had grown and spread across the West, each generation finding their own paths while carrying the stories of the ones who came before. "Do you think they understand?" Delilah asked softly. "The children and grandchildren, do they understand what it meant to choose this life?" Warren considered the question. "I think they understand that love matters. That is the important part. The rest is just details." As the stars began to emerge overhead, the same stars that had watched over them that first night in the desert, Delilah leaned her head on Warren's shoulder and felt the perfect contentment of a life well lived. They had built something beautiful from nothing, had created a family and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. It had started with a simple act of kindness, a cowboy offering help to a stranded woman, and it had grown into 40 years of partnership and joy and the kind of love that most people only dreamed of. Delilah thought about the stagecoach that had left her behind all those years ago, and she sent up a silent prayer of thanks for that moment of abandonment that had led her to exactly where she was supposed to be. "You can come with me," Warren had said on that dusty road in 1878, and she had trusted him enough to say yes. It was the best decision she had ever made, the single choice that had shaped everything that came after. In choosing Warren, she had chosen herself, had claimed the right to determine her own destiny. The desert night wrapped around them like a blanket, warm and familiar and infinite. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote called, and the river ran on as it always had, carving its patient path through stone. Warren's breathing slowed and steadied beside her, and Delilah knew he had dozed off, trusting her to wake him when it was time to go inside. She let him sleep, content to sit with her thoughts and her memories and the deep-bone knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged. The girl who had been left behind in the desert was gone, transformed into the woman who had built a life on her own terms. And the cowboy who had found her had become the man who had loved her faithfully through every season of their shared existence. In the end, Delilah thought as she finally roused Warren to help him inside, love was not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It was about the daily choice to keep choosing each other, to face hardship together, to build something beautiful from simple materials and stubborn hope. It was about 1,000 ordinary moments that added up to an extraordinary life. They walked into their home hand in hand, the way they had done for 40 years, and closed the door on another perfect day. Tomorrow would bring new joys and challenges, grandchildren to delight in and aches to endure, but they would face it together as they always had. Warren Yates and Delilah Sinclair Yates, the cowboy and the woman he had found in the desert, still writing their story with every breath, still choosing love with every sunrise. And that, in the end, was all that truly mattered.